Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining and thank you so much for joining us these past few days for the Brighter Futures Summit. Wonderful to have you here for this closing session. My name's Eric Baber. I'm the Director of Professional Learning and Development here at Cambridge University Press, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's panel session, Ask the Expert, along with my colleagues, which I will be introducing in a moment. Just before we get on to that, a few things. You've already had an opportunity to submit questions for this panel discussion, so we've gathered those and we have them here. That's fantastic. As we go along, though, if you do have any further questions or would like to join in on the conversation, please put your comments, especially into the Q&A box, questions rather, into the Q&A box, please. And we'll be keeping an eye on those. Also, just a final piece of administration. If you RSVP'd to the invitation for this event, you will be sent an email on Friday, the 26th of February, so that's tomorrow, containing a personalized certificate of attendance, plus links to the session recordings. So if you haven't RSVP'd to the event, you can still do that from our event webpage, which we can share later on as well. So without further ado then, as I say, welcome again. So this session is a panel discussion really between our invited experts who I'm very pleased to introduce now. So first of all, we have Silvana Richardson with us. Silvana is Head of Education at Bell Educational Services, Academic Director of Bell Teacher Academy, Cambridge, and Program Quality Manager at the Bell Foundation, which is a charity that commissions and disseminates research and trains staff in primary and secondary schools across England. It has the aim of overcoming exclusion through language education. Silvana is a guest lecturer on English as an additional language at the Faculty of Education at Cambridge University, and has been academic director of Bell Teacher Campus, also in Cambridge, and course director of the Bell Online Delta. So welcome, Silvana. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Also with us, we have Evelina Galaczi. Evelina is Head of Research Strategy at Cambridge Assessment English and leads a team of experts in language learning, teaching, and assessment. She has worked in language education for over 25 years and now oversees research projects on product development, the assessment of speaking, and the integration of digital technologies with assessment and learning. Welcome to you, Evelina.
Thank you.
And last but most certainly not least, we have with us Ben Knight. Ben Knight is Director of Language Research ELT at Cambridge University Press, and he is responsible for ensuring that high quality research underpins the learning materials, curriculum development, and teacher support that Cambridge University Press provides. Ben has taught and worked in several countries around the world with International House, the British Council, Cambridge Assessment, City and Guilds, and various other schools and universities. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
So thank you to all of you. So as I say, we have a collection of questions here, which we've worked through. There have been some very clear trends, probably not surprising, given the world that we are in at the moment. So we've sort of grouped them, and we've pulled out quite a few questions which we're hoping to answer over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. The first question I'd like to pull out, and Silvana, I think this is, I'm going to ask you to comment on this one first. Unsurprisingly, it's around online education, and the question specifically is, what is the most important characteristic an online teacher should have?
Thank you, Eric. Online teaching is teaching in a different medium to a face-to-face class. So it's still teaching, and I would say that the main characteristics, at least according to research, of what constitutes an expert teacher, I would say are very much the same, and they apply equally. So if you look at the research on expert teaching, for example, I'm thinking what Professor Hattie had said is one of the main characteristics of an expert teacher is somebody who he says has deeper representation, so understands really deeply how to organize and use the knowledge that they have to facilitate learning. Now that holds true for both face-to-face and online learning. Setting challenging goals is another characteristic. Same thing, really important in online learning to set challenging goals. I think the one that really matters here is the third characteristic, being sensitive to context. And the online learning context has its unique features, and therefore there are certain things here I suppose that we need to pay attention. Human interaction, for example, yes, you can hear my voice, you can see my face on Zoom, etc., but there are certain things that that need to be compensated for in the online medium. For example, in asynchronous activity and forums, etc. And then the last one that Hattie mentions of expert teachers is that they're excellent seekers and users of feedback information about the effects that they're having on their learners, so as to make more informed decisions about where to go next. Now, this is equally important in online learning, and I would say there are fantastic tools in online learning to allow us to seek feedback to inform teaching and learning. So that would be my answer. It's not necessarily a separate set of characteristics, but how in the different medium and the different context you apply your knowledge, you organize your thinking, your planning, your strategies, how you make sure that you come across as a human being you are to facilitate the learning of other human beings, and how you seek feedback.
Super. Thank you very much, Silvana. Evelina or Ben, is there anything you'd like to add?
I mean, Silvana gave such a fantastic response, but I would say from a human point of view, I think an online teacher is also somebody who is comfortable with change and comfortable with experimenting and going out of their comfort zone, because it's a new context, it's a new environment, and they should feel very comfortable to try out new things that maybe they haven't done before, and to draw on the experience of that and then take that feedback forward to the next thing they do. So comfort with change and experimentation, I think, is really important as well.
Yeah, and I would I agree completely that in the end it's the same teaching principles apply whether you're online or face to face. I think one of the things which I feel is different is that when you're face to face, especially if you're an experienced teacher, you've learned how to respond to your students. You see them in the class. You have a sixth sense about when they're engaging and they're not. And that's so much more difficult when you're online. So I feel that one of the key differences when you're teaching online is that you have to predict much more where you think there's going to be problems. You have to kind of anticipate misunderstandings or lack of interaction or participation and kind of plan it more than you might do in a face-to-face where you can be more responsive.
I'd just like to pick on something, Evelina, that you said there about teachers developing and so on, because that we have a very interesting question around that from a participant. The question is, how do we help teachers develop a growth mindset, and maybe especially the more seasoned teachers? So Ben, you're saying that experience is a good thing because you learn intuition, a sixth sense, but is there also a danger of fossilization of the more experienced teachers to sort of, effectively stopping their development? How can we carry on encouraging their growth mindset? Silvana, you've got a massive smile on your face.
Yes, it's something that really I think about a lot, and I'm very interested. What I would say, I have a confession to make. I'm not a big fan of Carol Dweck's work. So yes, and I've got reasons for that. There's been quite a few criticisms coming from trials that the promise that my growth mindset and all that is not really being fulfilled. But anyway, so if you would like me to kind of slightly rephrase the question and maybe change it to how can we encourage experienced teachers to continue learning and developing, I will be really happy to answer that one. And Chair, is that okay?
Yes, go on.
Okay. I think I'm really interested to share with you a piece of research, a meta-analysis conducted by Kennedy in 2016. And she says, because professional development providers work with practicing teachers, they're not merely offering a new idea but rather a different idea from the one that has guided teachers in the past. And she also says teachers participating in professional development have already developed their practice. This is really important, that they believe optimally resolves the various challenges they face. And they're likely to have formed habitual responses. That's the fossilization maybe that you were referring to, Eric, and favor certain methods. So any new idea offered by professional development requires not just adoption, but in many cases, abandonment of a prior approach. So she says, for teachers, enacting a new idea is not a matter of simple adoption, but rather a matter of figuring out whether and when and how to. And this reminded me, when I read it not that long ago, of something that James Atherton talks about. He's done a lot of research about learning as loss. Which I find fascinating, because we think a lot about learning as gain and change as gain, and how when we learn something new, and this applies to teachers and to students and to everybody, we gain, and there's so much value placed on change, which is, is fair enough. But what we kind of suppress is the thinking that alongside that there's also loss. James Atherton did a lot of research about that. Why do people resist learning? Why do also teachers resist learning? And professionals. And it's this same idea that, for you to, if what you are being asked to learn as a professional comes with the discourse of you've got to change the way you do things, you're very likely to resist it. And this is what Atherton calls supplantive learning. So if the discourse as a professional development provider from me comes, okay, now what you've been doing so far, not anymore, doesn't really work, of course there's going to be resistance. So one of the things that how we can encourage more experienced teachers to learn is to frame learning as what Atherton calls additive. So I'm going to add something to your repertoire. But it's not necessarily going to challenge and massively change your repertoire, because that's where teachers construct the change as a threat. So this is what he says. And then Kennedy says that the approaches that work in her meta-research and that allow teachers to transfer the learning of continuing professional development to their practice is when you present strategies or insights. So again, alternatives. So, this is what you could be doing, and this is how it works, or this is what research says. See how you feel about this. See what you think about this. See how this kind of adapts. Does it have mileage for your context? And this idea that we need to reconceptualize teachers as people with their own motivations, their own interests, and that ultimately, they know what they're doing. And the importance of intellectually engaging teachers, there's a lot of teacher development in my experience that is not really very challenging intellectually or cognitively. So here's another one, and here's another one, and let's try it, and it's not cognitively engaging. So, and not just presenting prescriptions and presenting just bodies of knowledge that teachers cannot really see the practical implications for.
Can I just quickly add something? So that idea of challenge, I'll be very brief. That idea of challenge, I think, can very usefully come from the professional community around teachers in their school, and I think professional communities are underutilized resources in making us look at our own practices and giving us access to different practices that could then, enrich our own practices. So tapping into the power of the professional community around us, I think, is really important in developing that constant thirst for doing something maybe differently or for challenging ourselves a bit more.
And can I just say something? I think what Evelina is saying is really important because it's non-threatening. It's my colleagues.
Yes.
My suggestion for professional development, especially for online teaching, is to become a student on an online course. If you follow a course online, it's an eye-opener to you as a teacher. I remember from my own experience this isn't online, but when I was doing a master's, after years of setting group work and interrupting people before they finished and not thinking anything about it, when I experienced it myself, of people setting you something to collaborate on and then being interrupted before you finished. I hated it, and it was an eye-opener to the way that I was teaching. So I think experiencing life as a learner is really important.
Which, interestingly, I think many teachers have had to do now over the course of the pandemic. So, I mean, is right now perhaps a golden opportunity to tap into the fact that, Silvana, you were saying that teachers need a motivation to change. They need an agent to change. Pretty much every teacher has had a motivation to change, whether they've liked it or not. Do you think now is a golden opportunity that actually for the last 12 months or whatever, they have had to rethink their teaching? As we now go back into the classroom, is this a golden age for school managers, school leaders to sort of say, okay, right, you are now in the habit again of rethinking your teaching. Let's ride on that.
I would say one of the things that really impressed me, you know, and I'm going to borrow a phrase from the chair of the Chartered College of Teaching. I can't remember her name right now, but it will come to me. Dame, anyway, she said, "I've never been prouder of our profession." And the way that teachers more than rose to the challenge of having to, you know, remember that week, you know, last year, where you had a couple of days to work from face to the online environment has been amazing. And then the sustained learning of, you know, week on week, and the sharing that Evelina was talking about. You know, this is what I've discovered about this, and that has been amazing. But I would also say that some organizations already have done that. You know, where I work, we are in the habit of constantly learning. So it, you know, the fact that we need to keep on learning didn't come as a surprise. Maybe in other organizations where there is less of a prioritization of continuing professional development, that might be more of an issue. That's what I would say. And I've forgotten the question, so I'll let my colleagues go on.
Yeah, that's fine. In fact, I think I might direct the various things that have been said here. Sort of recapture maybe a little thing. So as you say, it was about a year ago that teachers had to repoint, and it's been going on for a year now in many parts of the world, off and on. And we have various questions. So going down into a little bit more of a micro detail here, perhaps about online teaching and learning. A big issue is motivation, both for the teacher and for the learner. Have you three got any tips about a year on? How can we keep the students motivated, and how can we keep our teachers motivated? If we haven't seen each other face to face for however long. Ben, looks like you were about to jump in there. Over to you.
So is the question really about keeping them motivated when working online?
It's specifically, yeah. Yes, but we're happy to take the wider context, but I think specifically online if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of things that teachers are doing, which I think helps with this. And it kind of relates a little bit to what I was saying before, that I think when you're a teacher in a classroom, you have your finger on the pulse, and you respond to that in a way which needs more thought. So I think one of the things that I think teachers who are kind of successfully engaging their students are doing is they're breaking their lessons up into smaller chunks. So they're thinking more in terms of 5 or 10-minute activities, and they're varying the pace and the nature of it, that how much is in groups or single, or synchronous or asynchronous. And I think that's one of the really important things is about not thinking that a lesson, which might be a 40-minute lesson or 45-minute lesson, is really all 100% synchronous, as it is in the classroom, or tends to be in the classroom. You know, you can have people working on different stuff off camera, doing that, and in a way you're almost creating like mini flipped activities for students to work on. I think the main thing, which is easy to lose, is the interaction. And so that if anything, I think teachers have to absolutely maximize opportunities for interaction artificially, and prioritize that over almost anything else. And one of the ideas which I think works quite nicely, or can work quite nicely, is perhaps if you've got a class of 30 students, you know, thinking of those as 6 groups of 5. Now my maths suddenly, 6 groups of 5, and they're kind of working round those so that you have a 10 minutes of or 5 minutes intensively with each group of 5, where you really have a lot of interaction, and then they can work together on another project or individually. So keeping that range of activities, trying to maximize the interactivity, those are the kind of things I'd be looking for.
And my view about motivation, just going back to the question of motivation of students, I think it's about engaging the whole student. So there's the cognitive world of students. So, that's what you're teaching them, developing cognitive abilities. Then there's their emotional world, then their social world. And there's research about these 3 worlds have to come together into the classroom for you to keep motivation. So just one example, my son is 15 years old. The last thing he wants to do is school right now. He's not motivated to do anything. But if his teacher assigns him to do a presentation of his favorite online game, he's happy to do it. So his emotional and social world are brought into this assignment, which develops his cognitive world. So for me, motivation is about engaging the social and emotional side of your students. And if you do that, you're winning with motivation, I think.
Yeah.
Interesting. Sorry, so just because that kind of turns or refers back to the original question, what makes a good online teacher? What you've just said there, Evelina, is engaging the emotional and social part of the learner. Doesn't matter whether the learning is online or in the face-to-face.
Doesn't matter. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, Silvana.
No, I just wanted to say that I totally agree with Evelina, and actually, my answer to the question is to add a humanist, the old-fashioned humanistic touch, and to give specific examples of the work we've done with our students in our schools. Focus on positive news stories, sharing what keeps us motivated, sharing what keeps us positive, and there were talks about and Padlets about chocolate, and watching silly llamas on YouTube and things like that, talking about or writing about things or people that give us joy, that we love, that we care about, or that we feel passionate about, and people actually sharing those photos or videos, etc., and watching each other's. What we're doing to keep well and safe as well, just advice to each other, so bring it in. Offering choice as well. So asking students to, this is the moment to offer a lot of choice, to say, students, what would you like to read about? What would you like to listen about? What would you like to write about? What would you like to speak about? And also show them that we care in the small things, that if we notice something, you're on Zoom or Teams or whatever, and you notice that a student has constantly their camera off, or, that they're kind of looking, just at the end of the lesson, instantly drop him a little message, that shows concern and I wonder how you're getting on. Is there anything we can do, etc., etc.
So camera off, if I can pick up on that, camera off is a really big, because I've done a few of these events lately, and teachers always ask, what do I do when my students don't want to turn the camera off? And the first thing you should do, find out, is why don't they want to turn the camera off? Show them that you're not insisting on this rule. Find out about their emotional reason for this and work around it. So Silvana said that humanist approach, and bring your own kind of human being into this, not just the teacher who has to give you grades, but a human teacher who cares about you.
In a way, the interesting thing, I agree completely with you, Evelina, that the interesting thing is that in some ways we're in a better position for students to bring their own lives into the lesson because they're actually in their homes. Whereas normally they're kind of in the classroom, detached from their home world. So asking them to bring things of interest into the camera is kind of easier.
Which integrates very nicely with a question that Melissa has asked. Melissa's in the audience today. How to evaluate motivation in scholars, teachers, and students who work from home during this pandemic sessions. So what you've described there is a teacher being able to tell when a student has lost their motivation. They've turned off their camera. You can visually see that they're no longer engaging. What about the teachers? If you're a school leader, as a school leader, you're at home, your teachers are at home in their respective homes. How can you tell what the level of motivation of the teachers is?
It's a difficult one because it depends on how, there are many teachers or many managers as well on partial furlough and things like that, and reduced hours. So your possibilities to connect with your teaching staff are, in many cases, they're fewer. But I think it's about relationship, isn't it? If you've got a really good relationship, the same thing applies. You can see by, talking to a member of your team, whether they're tired or exhausted, or you have a conversation and the communication channels to be yourself and to let the other person be themselves. And also, I think creating the communities that Evelina was talking about, we do that on a weekly basis as part of our CPD, but, there's always an opportunity to talk as human beings, and there's also that open door to say how we feel, what we're struggling with, what challenges we have found, and it's really important to have that ongoing conversation about that. So for example, in our CPD sessions we had conversations about the endless Zoom fatigue, and I can't watch that screen anymore, my eyes are crying, kind of, or are dry, and what can we do about that? And having conversations with managers who are constantly working with a screen, for teachers is a relatively new experience. So that kind of offering a community as well, not just of learning, but also of being connected and being professionals, being challenged and supporting each other as we go along.
And to pick up on this, I think a key skill is listening. This is what Silvana was kind of talking about. Showing your teachers you care, showing your teachers you understand how difficult it is for them, telling them, showing them it's difficult for you as well, and listening, properly listening to what they're telling you are their concerns. That would motivate them and build trust and connection with that team.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're a manager within an organization, an educational institution, I think it might be useful to think about the total kind of time, because time and energy is limited. So how do you find that time and energy to put into that interactive checking thing? I think you have to dial down on something. And so I think this is the time to dial down on a lot of the more administrative tracking of progress, all those things. We know, that progress is not going to be the same as it was in previous years. We know this is a crisis, it's a difficult situation. No one is talking about, the COVID gain in any of this. We know everyone's going to struggle, and getting through people with their sanity is more important. So dial down on the tracking and the administrative stuff and the lesson plans that have to be sent in, or whatever it is takes people time, and move the energy to interaction and checking.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I completely agree. Yeah, show them that you care, you understand, and part of that is by prioritizing what's important and deprioritizing what maybe is not critical right now. Yeah.
Super, thank you. We've been talking about online teaching, online learning, about the human side of things. One thing that we haven't touched upon yet, which also came through as a theme really in the various questions, also just now in the live question and answer box, is around evaluation, assessment and evaluation, which is obviously a significant part of the learning journey. One of the questions we had come in earlier was, would you recommend evaluating just the productive skills on exams as they are online? Or is it possible to assess all the skills?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend, if it depends, of course, what you're testing for, what you're evaluating for, but if it's a broad area, if it's the broad area of communicative language competence, I wouldn't recommend evaluating just a subset of that. You really need to find the way to evaluate all the important skills: reading, listening, writing, and speaking. And as we've been talking, Silvana and Ben have been talking, interaction is really important. You need to find the way to bring interaction into that evaluation, because that's a critical language skill that has to be evaluated as well. So I'm repeating myself, but it really is about evaluating the whole spectrum of what language is, and not just a subset of it.
I think it might also be worth looking at the whole concept of cheating. So Melissa has just asked in the Q&A box, what strategies do you recommend to reduce cheating on online examinations? There's probably a difference between high stakes, low stakes, exams, assessment, and so on.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, actually. Cheating is really connected for me very closely with the test design. Some test designs are very easy to cheat on. Some test designs are not so easy to cheat on. So if you have a test that is just multiple choice, let's say reading, listening, grammar, and vocabulary, that's easy to cheat on. You can get your friend to do it, your mom or your dad. But if you have a test that is, again, covers that broad range of what languages, if the test includes interaction, so there's a speaking, interaction there with the teacher, there's no way you can teach that, someone can cheat. If the test involves bigger pieces of writing, again, much more difficult to get someone to cheat. If it involves peer assessment, so the test design can reduce cheating massively. And if you have a communicative approach to the test design, then it's less easy to cheat on that design, on that test.
Okay, super. Yeah, thank you. And sorry, Ben, go ahead.
I'm not an assessment expert like Evelina, but I was just going to say, I think one of the things that I would be doing as a teacher would be thinking of a more portfolio approach, kind of building up small pieces of writing, recordings of speaking over a term, over a semester. And that makes it much more difficult for someone to just call in a friend for that repeatedly.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, I should have said that. I should have said that as well. Yes, again, and that's again about the design. Is your evaluation based on 1 2-hour block, or is it based on evidence gathered throughout the semester of the year? And if it's a portfolio approach, again, that's much more difficult to cheat on. Yes.
It's a big issue, isn't it? Because it has huge time implications. So if as a teacher, you're the one delivering or designing the form of assessment, you really have to change, as you say, Evelina, how you deliver or how you construct the piece of assessment. If it's something that is delivered by the institution to the entire student base, an end of year examination, that's big. You have to change the entire strategy, really. And maybe just for one sitting, hopefully just for one sitting. So it's a big,
it is. But I think teachers and the decision makers in their community need to be thinking not just now, not just short term, what happens when we, during COVID and what happens immediately after. They need to be thinking long term. And long term means that you need to be building some processes or think in place now so that you can have something different in 3 years' time. And that could be portfolio based assessment, which I think is really a fantastic way to be assessing. But you need to be changing your thinking now to have that in 3 years' time. So I would encourage long-term thinking triggered by the pandemic for in practices in schools.
And also related to what Evelina's saying, if you're thinking strategically long term, then you can build in the professional development to develop assessment literacy, because sometimes one of the things that's a little bit overlooked in teaching qualifications is assessment literacy. And that's why it's easy to fall back, if you like, on other designed assessments all the time, rather than design teacher assessments that are valid, reliable, etc.
Yes, yeah.
That's really interesting and ties in very nicely with another thread that's come out. The big question, or the big picture question, is what will the long-term effect of the pandemic be on education? But if we drill that down a little bit, or try to focus it a bit more narrowly, are there any specific skills perhaps, or any changes that look like micro changes at the moment, but might actually lead to an inflection point in education that you could see arising because of the pandemic?
I'd just say something that's obvious, but I think nevertheless it needs to be said, which is for many, many people have been doing online blended learning for a long time. But what the pandemic has done is that many people who have not had good experiences of online learning have discovered online learning. And some, not just students, but also teachers are saying, I like this. I don't want to go back to this, to face-to-face and brick and mortar schools. So I think there will be a recalibration of, what people now have got more choice and they have experimented. So a recalibration even in schools of, how much more online or blended experiences to offer, and not just face-to-face, particularly for those who have only up until now just offered face-to-face learning.
Go on, Ben.
No.
I mean, really, just again, it's the role of technology. That's not going to disappear. That will stay with us. So it's about finding ways to use technology in a way that adds value. And maybe that's, just an online platform. Maybe it's something that has AI built into it. Let's say assessment of writing, speaking, giving feedback. But finding ways to build technology in a really value-added way and keeping the rest, the human being, is for me what we should be thinking of in terms of a permanent change.
I think one of the other changes, which I hope will continue to grow, is the increasing importance of learner autonomy in this. I think one of the shocks that I think teachers have found is that put students on their own outside the class, and a lot of them lack the skills to be able to manage their own learning because the teachers are doing it all for them in the classroom. So one of the lessons from the last 12 months is learners, students from a young age have to learn how to learn and manage their own learning a lot more. And if that could carry on, if we could strengthen those skills of students making choices and decisions, organizing their learning, even when we can go back, I think that would be a win.
And I think that's so important, because what we've seen is that with the move from the face-to-face to the online, etc., is that because teachers had to develop new skills, a lot of the teaching is, again, very controlled and just maybe for a sense of security. And what you see at the student end of the spectrum is that they're receiving lots of the equivalent of photocopies on random emails or screenshots, or and then we're not really necessarily focusing on what's happening at the learner end of the spectrum. So how are learners organizing that a number of things coming from the learning platform or whatever, but how are students actually making sense of that? How are they reviewing? How are they how is that helping them organize their learning? And I think that's something that we need to think more about, and we need to work more on.
Yeah. Can I just again, for me that's really important. It's the idea of going beyond what you're teaching, going beyond your subject to what Ben and Silvana are talking about. And if I can just plug something that Ben has been working on, which is the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework on the Cambridge University Press website. It's a fantastic resource that talks precisely about these other skills: how to become a better learner, autonomy, communication, self-efficacy. It's really good to focus on that as well, in addition to just teaching them English, because it is actually, that's the more important stuff, in fact.
We're teaching the learners, we're not teaching them a subject.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Super. We are nearly out of time before we have a bit of a wrap up, but I wanted to end with a question that I thought was super. To all three of you in turn, what do you think was the biggest challenge you faced, and how did you deal with it over the past 12 months? Any volunteers to go first? Ben?
Well, I would say that the biggest, obviously I'm not a teacher now, so I don't have those challenges, but as a team, what we've struggled with most is to have that creativity and kind of shared energy that comes from being in the same place. When we go into the office and we have a coffee, or we do something, we bounce ideas off each other in a way which is spontaneous and creative. And that's quite difficult to do in a world where everything is planned online meetings. So I mean, we now schedule into our week 10-minute encounters where we pretend like we've just bumped into each other.
Very nice.
And try to recreate that, find an answer to something that's worrying us.
Very good.
Sorry, yeah, go on, Evelina.
No, go, Silvana.
No.
Okay. For me, it's actually been similar to Ben. It's the idea of connection with my team. That's been the biggest challenge. I mean, many challenges. This is one of them professionally. It's connecting with my team, because we used to be, in the same place 4 or 5 days a week. And so keeping the sense of connection strong and keeping my team motivated has been challenging. And like Ben, we've tried to find different ways to do these things, like stand-ups, when we just share something about our week, random coffee chats where we kind of sign up and you randomly get assigned to meet with someone, things like that. Yeah.
For me, it's been keeping up with changes and reality. You know, I work in a school that's mainly, it has got elements of online learning, and it had them before, but suddenly in less than a week to move absolutely everything online, colleagues going on furlough, many of them, some of them leaving, and changes, you know, happening every day, and not having the time sometimes to process those losses and changes. And so for me, I've gone part-time. One of the things that I've learned was the value of closing the computer at the end of the day and saying, I need to process everything that's happening to me, and this is having an impact on my well-being, and giving the space and the time that my well-being needed, and knowing that it's okay not to be okay. So for the time being, I'm working online. Sorry, part-time.
Fantastic.
Eric, what about you? We're not going to let you get away with this.
Two things. Well, I think there's the professionally the disassembly of the team. I feel that as well, and like Ben, we don't call them encounters, but I like that term. We have water cooler conversations where anything goes. Still slightly formalized because it's in our calendars, but there we go. On a professional note, I am so sick of feeding 4 children. And they're all, you know, they're between 11 and 17, so they should be able to feed themselves. But 3 meals a day, I've had enough. I want to go back.
It is tough. I can relate to that. Yes. The chef duties.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Ben, Silvana, and Evelina. That was really, really good, very enjoyable, and really, really interesting. Thank you to all of you who submitted questions beforehand and also over the course of the session. And I'm just going to hand over to Phil, who is going to wrap up this whole event. Phil, thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this panel. It was great fun and really interesting, as I say. And over to you for a wrap up.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, Silvana. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Evelina. It's been a fascinating discussion. It's been inspiring, and there's been an awful lot of wisdom there. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thoughts and inspiring us all. I know I've got plenty of food for thought to be chewing over. This brings us to the end of the Brighter Futures Conference. It's been the first presented by Learning Solutions, and we are incredibly delighted to have had your participation in this conference and to have met you and to have shared ideas with you and connected. So just as a quick wrap up of what we've experienced together, we have listened to Ben Houghton give a fascinating keynote speech which introduced us to the concept of listening with a highlighter pen. I know that many of us will be very keen to try out that approach. We've also welcomed Nikki Hockley, who gave a fascinating interactive session, which was around making the most of blended learning. And I saw the interactions happening in that session. It was really wonderful to see. And we also welcomed colleagues from Mexico, Ale Prado from UVM and Ricardo, one of our own teacher trainers at Cambridge. And they gave us a case study of implementing blended learning in UVM, the university. But we felt that it was also a really great case study of how to manage change in general. And again, there was some really good interaction at the end of that session. We then welcomed Hayo Renders, who gave a really interesting talk about some fascinating ideas, including the language slider, which is a really interesting concept around how we look at different modalities and how we explore those in the new context. It was a really engaging and inspiring talk. Then our very own Karen and Matt delivered an interactive session, which I was part of. Fascinating to see all the different contexts that you're coming from as participants and all of the different experiences that you were sharing. It was wonderful. Nick Peachy talked about disruption to the ELT industry and how that's working and the parallels with what Uber did. And we've rounded off with this wonderful and extremely stimulating discussion around so many different ideas we've explored today. I want to say some thank yous to the organisers of this conference. So a huge shout out to Wendy and Catherine and Katie and Emily, and also to my colleagues John, Matt, Karen and Ben and Eric, who are with us right now in the session. It wouldn't have been possible without them, and I'd like to give them a huge thank you. Really appreciate all of your support. And just to round us off, I wanted to say that in today's session, we've heard so much about humanistic approaches, about connectedness, about being together. And I was really interested also to hear about sharing, the approach of sharing joy and pain. I feel that in sessions like this, we can connect internationally. We can all be together in the same digital space. And for me, I gain a lot of strength from that. And although we can't be in the same physical place, we are digitally together. So these ideas of being connected, being together, and being simultaneously inspired by the same ideas and the same approaches is very, very exciting for me and brings me a lot of strength, as I say. So wishing you all a wonderful day ahead, a wonderful time until we meet again for the next Brighter Future conference, and all of the very best wishes for a brighter future for all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget, all the sessions are on catch up, so you can see them on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Goodbye.